What's the biggest thing you can think of? A planet? A star? A galaxy? Well, I hate to break it to you, but Alexander Kashlinsky probably has you beat. Although it's pretty difficult to prove. You see, a few years ago, during his research at NASA, he discovered several clusters of galaxies were moving toward the edge of our observable universe at up to 1,000 kilometers per second. And that's weird. As far as we know, the only thing this can mean is that there's something unfathomably massive right outside of our universe, and it's producing so much gravity that it's pulling entire galaxies in with ease. We call it the dark flow. And if this megastructure really exists, we've never encountered anything this big before. Well, unless you cheated and counted our entire universe as one thing, maybe. There's a theory known as eternal inflation that suggests after the Big Bang, a large portion of space-time never stopped inflating, but some small bubbles cropped up that did, resulting in a sea of isolated bubble universes, one of which we live in. And if this theory is true, then there's at least a chance that the dark flow is caused by another universe pushing up against ours. It's time to question how unique our universe is. If you play a lot of video games, watch a lot of sci-fi, or read a lot of comic books, you probably know what I'm talking about. The idea that our reality is just one of many is as old as storytelling itself. This universe is home to Superman, truth, justice, and hope. In another universe, Superman is a communist. In one universe, Superman is a woman. In another universe, Superman is a vampire. Infinite realities, all different, but all equally true. How is that possible? And more importantly, is it possible for us too? Is there a world out there where you're a woman and I'm a vampire? Well, maybe, but we aren't sure. There are a number of theories like the one I mentioned before that suggest we could live in a multiverse, but none of them have had a chance to be conclusively tested. We just don't have any proof one way or another. Fortunately, companies like Nintendo have taken the time to illustrate at least one possibility for us. Ladies and gentlemen, a map of the Zelda multiverse. For those of you unfamiliar with it, this is the closest thing we have to an all-encompassing official bird's eye view of everything the Legend of Zelda brand has ever published in continuity. And I say the closest thing we have because it is missing a few things, but we'll get to that later. The more important revelation here is that this map is overflowing with scientific concepts that provide a basic blueprint for how our multiverse might really work. But it's really a lot to take in at once. So let's start smaller. In fact, let's start as small as we can get. Quick question, what's my hand made of? Well, skin cells, right? Okay. But what are those made of? Atoms. And those are made of protons, neutrons, and electrons. Alright, but what are those made of? I don't know. Quarks, tiny subatomic particles. What are those made up of? What's the tiniest thing in the universe, the most basic thing anything can be? Well, some time ago, scientists suggested the answer might be strings. Tiny one-dimensional strings of energy. So small that if the smallest atom were the size of our solar system, strings would be about the size of an average tree. And these strings are important to understanding the multiverse, especially the Zelda multiverse, because they vibrate. And if they exist, they all have slightly different vibrational patterns, which on a larger scale helps them create different things. This string is part of an electron, this string is part of a photon, etc. And all of this was proposed in the appropriately named superstring theory, a theory which has been confirmed in the Zelda universe, but it's still being researched here. And most physicists agree that there are good reasons to back this theory. It unifies the four fundamental forces of the universe. It resolves the conflict between Einstein's general theory of relativity and quantum mechanics, but the math that allows the strings to vibrate properly says they have to be moving through at least 9 spatial dimensions. This is a problem. As far as we can see, there are only 3 spatial dimensions: length, width, and depth. Yes, there's one dimension of time, but it's not a spatial dimension. So where are all the other dimensions hiding? Zelda has an answer for us. You see, we're in that little center, the light world. All those little bubbles, or rather squares in this drawing, are universes. And they're floating inside a bigger bubble, inside a bigger bubble, inside of a bigger bubble. This is shockingly consistent with something called M-theory, a basic revision of string theory that adds another dimension, and suggests the reason we can only move in 3 of them is because we're stuck on a membrane. Consider it like a giant flat version of the strings we discussed earlier. These membranes, or branes, can exist in any dimension vibrating at their own frequency with the smaller one-dimensional strings tied down to them. So theoretically, our universe could be tied down to a 3-dimensional brane vibrating through 4th-dimensional space, and on a 4th-dimensional brane vibrating through 5th-dimensional space, so on and so forth. And at this point, things have probably gotten a little confusing. It's really hard to imagine something with more than 3 dimensions, and it's even harder to illustrate it. After all, we've only ever experienced 3 of them. So think of it like this. Pretend like this 3-dimensional bread is some higher dimensional space. Some people call it hyperspace, some call it the bulk, but that's not important. From this perspective, a 3-dimensional brane would be an impossibly thin 2-dimensional slice of bread, and our universe would be tied down to that slice by strings. If every slice is another 3-dimensional brane with another 3-dimensional universe on it, there could be an unfathomable number of universes out there vibrating through some higher dimension. This is how Zelda explains its brane universes. Hyrule Warriors, Cadence of Hyrule, even Mario Kart, they're said to be part of the Zelda universe, but not part of the main timeline. They're separate branes vibrating in the same space, all at different frequencies within the all-encompassing bulk. If there really is infinite hyperspace out there, and infinite possibilities for branes, then it only logically leads to infinite universes, some that are almost exactly like our own. A concept Zelda touched on in 2014 and has never really let go of. Zelda's map of the multiverse even shows higher dimensions. A quick zoom out seems to reveal the bulk itself is in an even higher dimensional brane, vibrating even faster in an even higher dimensional space, better known as the Minish realm. I tried figuring out what dimension the Minish realm is in, but it wasn't entirely clear. All I know for sure is that it's higher up than the bulk, which heavily implies there are even more bulks, with even more multiverses vibrating through the Minish realm, that just aren't shown on the map. In fact, some of the bulk's companion branes have even shown to be multiverses themselves. But if we zoom out even further, we find even this bulk looks like it's attached to an even higher brane in higher dimensional space. That little box at the top of the map is the heavens, a realm beyond matter and memory, that should theoretically observe infinite branes with infinite variations of realms that house infinities. This is where the golden goddesses keep watch over all the ongoings of existence. It comfortably seats them, judging by Demise's superspace, the 10th dimension, allowing string theory to work properly. But beyond even that, there's something. We don't know what. Theoretically, this should be the 11th dimension, housing infinite variations of everything that has, will, or can exist, but the Zelda map won't allow us to see it. The real question is, does our multiverse look like this? Well, probably not. But physicists are researching string theory every day, and it could be closer than we think. It already seems to have a few concepts pretty well illustrated, and funnily enough, it doesn't stop there. If you're a fan of this series, you know exactly what I'm talking about. We talked about 2 different interpretations of the multiverse. One involves infinite expansion resulting in isolated bubble universes, and the other involves at least 9 different spatial dimensions, currently represented by Zelda's lore. While those are 2 very prominent theories about how the multiverse might work, if it exists at all, there are definitely more out there. But it's a little difficult to say how many due to the fact that even talking about most of these theories requires using terms with a lot of conflicting definitions. For example, what is a universe? And for that matter, what's a multiverse? One multiverse theory suggests that space just goes on forever. And because of its boundless existence, there logically has to be another life form exactly like you somewhere across the cosmos on a planet exactly like Earth, in a solar system exactly like ours, in a galaxy exactly like the Milky Way. This interpretation is known as the quilted multiverse. But is it really a multiverse at all, or is it just one big universe? A similar problem arises using the word dimension. You might have noticed I keep using the word spatial dimension, and that's because the word dimension by itself is actually pretty vague. We exist in at least 3 spatial dimensions right now. There's no denying that, but time is also a dimension. And sometimes dimension is just another word for universe, or multiverse, or pocket of segmented spacetime. With all these terms floating around, it really is difficult to get a full grasp on every interpretation of the multiverse and what they all mean. Zelda handles this pretty well. Yes, while Zelda isn't the absolute best at mapping out its cosmos, it does a much better job of defining it. And even though there are some confusing bits here and there, character exposition and guidebooks have been fairly consistent over the years and allowed us to gain an inside look at how Zelda's universe works without the need of an orientation merit badge and basic understanding of string theory. Allow me to explain. If you recall, in the Zelda multiverse, variations of characters, worlds, etc. exist because there are infinite brains, and by law of probability, every variation of the universe has to play out somewhere. But what I didn't say is that also in the Zelda multiverse, different continuities don't typically take place on different brain universes. They usually take place on different quantum universes. So what's the difference? Well, while bubble universes are separated from each other by constantly inflating spacetime, and brain universes are separated because their inhabitants are tied down to smaller dimensions, quantum universes are separated by time divergences, and this should sound familiar. This is one of the more popular multiverse models out there. It originated as a proposed solution to several issues that plagued experiments in quantum mechanics. It's a classic thought experiment that we're going to add a new twist to for explaining the Zelda multiverse. I present to you Schrödinger's Link. Link is fighting Ganondorf. The fight seems pretty evenly matched, so for this moment between the start and end of the fight, Link must be considered for all practical purposes, both alive and dead. But when the fight is over, Zelda will either be greeted by a living breathing Link, or the traumatizing image of his corpse. Not both. The problem is physicists don't know how this happens. How does Link's superstate collapse into one outcome? Why is one outcome chosen over the other? How is it decided? Well, the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics suggests it isn't, but rather every time there's a conflict like this, the timeline of history splits, creating one universe where Link is just fine, and another universe where Zelda probably needs therapy. And this isn't me speculating either. There's a map of this very event I'm using as an example. If we read the Japanese translation of the defeated timeline, it reads as follows. In the event that the hero fails, a different history is spun. It's not some kind of outside force using magic. It's simply the possibility of Link's death creating a universe where the defeat timeline takes place. This is just how Zelda works. And this is how the more important of Zelda's realities operate. Each universe in the Zelda multiverse is a little bit different, because the entire multiverse's system grew from divergences in the timeline. There's a universe where Ganon won. There's a universe where Link doesn't even let the events of Ocarina of Time play out. You're probably familiar with it if your favorite games are Majora's Mask or Twilight Princess. And there's a universe where, because Link was sent back to stop Ocarina of Time from happening, the future he left no longer has a hero, which leads to Wind Waker. Every game over, every decision, every side quest you choose to do or not, is a timeline split. And there isn't a map of it. It's just something that's been established in the Zelda narrative for years now. They made this clear when they told the fandom about the timeline split in 2002. You'll notice that unlike, say, Back to the Future, in the Zelda universe, it's really difficult to travel back to your own past or alter events that have already occurred. Because unless you have very precise control over the universe, time travel counts as a timeline divergence. All you can do is make another universe where things played out a little differently. But let's slow things down a bit. If the Zelda multiverse is really just one big branch of diverging timelines, then does anything anyone does matter? Well, there's a very similar multiverse out there. Marvel Comics. Most of you probably know that Earth 199,999, or the Marvel Cinematic Universe, was attacked by Loki in 2012. The newly formed Avengers were able to stop his army and ruin his plans. But if quantum universes really split each time, there's a conflict like this. What's it matter? There should be a universe out there where Loki won, right? Should heroes even bother trying? Yes, they should. Because in Zelda, much like Marvel, not just any universe is allowed to exist. There are beings out there that pass judgments over universes and can do whatever they want without creating new realities. You might wonder how that's possible. But it's actually pretty simple. While events that occur inside a quantum universe are subject to the basic laws of how quantum universes operate, things that occur to the universe due to outside influence are not. It really isn't that hard to avoid creating a divergence. All you have to do is meddle around in a timeline you don't belong in. For instance, if I decided to travel from my timeline to another timeline, the universe does not pop up, in which I decided not to travel between timelines. Because it isn't happening in the universe, it's happening on a greater multiversal scale. Then once I get to the new timeline, I'm a free agent whose actions can only have one outcome, because there isn't a timeline in which I didn't arrive to that timeline. Sound familiar? If you're familiar with Zelda, it should. We've seen this exact situation. Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. Terrako does this. Or as a better, less confusing example, there was one event in which the Wolverine from Earth 616 kept time traveling over and over again in an attempt to stop Ultron from rising to power. But like I mentioned earlier, it isn't easy to change the past in a quantum multiverse. Wolverine just ended up making more and more universes until he eventually created a massive tear in the space-time continuum that echoed through the entire multiverse and started displacing people across realities. The Zelda multiverse isn't void of free will just because every possibility is destined to eventually play out, primarily because entities exist that can affect the multiverse as a whole. Heroes have a vested interest in doing their best to make sure their reality is the one they prevail in. So the point stands that happy endings are still worth fighting for, even in a quantum universe like Zelda. Because if Link's next big villain actually succeeds in taking over the universe, the very next thing that happens to that timeline might not be pretty. Now, if you'll recall the beginning of this video, I listed dimension as a loose term that needed better defining in a lot of multiverse discussions, but Nintendo has mostly taken care of that when talking about their own multiverse. Dimensions in Zelda are almost always segmented areas of space-time with limited size that exist beyond the main universe. It's just another way to say small universe that doesn't look or maybe act like ours. As an example, this is Malados. He's a powerful demon who rules a dimension called Hell, or the Dark Realm in English. And while his dimension is definitely separate from the main universe, it's not a higher spatial dimension that contains other universes, like say the Minish Realm. However, there are a few rare examples of Zelda using the word dimension to refer to a higher plane of space, specifically in Four Swords Anniversary, a storyline that focused on the celebration of the Downfall timeline games as they were the first in the franchise. To make a really long story short, Vati, another demon, kidnaps Zelda. Link seals him away, and the Triforce allows him to go through the events of A Link to the Past, Oracle of Ages and Seasons, and Hyrule Fantasy, but as an avatar to keep the multiverse in check via the Realm of Memories. But I know what you're really thinking. What's the purpose of the Realm of Memories in a quantum multiverse, which is already stable by nature and has every possibility destined to play out? Well, the answer lies within the realm itself. Because while it does connect to every possible timeline, it's also a three-dimensional construct that exists in five-dimensional space. That's right, the same higher dimensional concept that we discussed at length earlier. So what does this mean? The Zelda multiverse not only has a quantum timeline structure, but also a multi-dimensional brain structure. And that makes perfect sense. That's why higher powers like the Triforce can do whatever they want in any universe without causing a divergence, because they might be acting in one reality, but they are doing so from a higher dimension. And this doesn't interfere with the concept of a quantum multiverse at all. In fact, we've officially discussed 4 different scientifically plausible models of the multiverse, and none of them are mutually exclusive. That is to say, any of these 4 models of the multiverse could be accurate, or they could all be accurate. And Zelda more than supports this idea. Zelda has operated as a brain multiverse for a long time. But Zelda has still had the occasional crossover with Mario, Sonic, even Super Smash Bros. And while there has been evidence of Smash having a quantum side to its multiverse as well, we know Zelda exists on a brain separate from it, because when the Zelda Encyclopedia was released, they went out of the way to tell the audience all these crossovers are still connected to the Zelda multiverse even if it isn't on the main timeline branches. And as you might have guessed, there's a word for this too, the Omniverse. There are a lot of different stories that use this word to mean a lot of different things, even in Marvel sometimes. It includes everyone from Spider-Man to Superman, from Little Mac to Rocky Balboa, from Romeo and Juliet to Bill and Ted, from Saitama to Goku, from Snoopy to Garfield, from L to Mr. L. Even fan fictions, cancelled works, fantasies, mere thoughts, and things that haven't been published yet. We can keep making connections all day long, and I say go for it. But with all these different realities, I know you have options on what you spend time looking into, so thanks for stopping by to chat with me for a while. Maybe leave a follow if you're into these kinds of discussions. I do them pretty often.